ask Julia to come up here first and read our passage this morning.
22? Just 20? Okay, all right. So this is Revelation, chapter 3, verses 14 to 22. To the angel of the church in Laodicea, write, "These are the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the ruler of God's creation. I know your deeds, that you are neither hot nor cold. I wish you were either one or the other. So, because you're lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth. You say, I am rich, I have acquired wealth and do not need a thing. But you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in the fire, so you can become rich, and white clothes to wear, so you can cover your shameful nakedness, and salve to put on your eyes, so you can see. Those whom I love, I rebuke and discipline, so be earnest and repent. Here I am, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person, and they with me. To the one who is victorious, I will give the right to sit with me on my throne, just as I was victorious and sat down with my Father on his throne. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches."
So I actually just want to pray too before we start here. Holy Spirit, I thank you for your presence here this morning. And I pray that we would have ears to hear what you say to our church this morning. Your word sometimes can be challenging, but always drenched with love. And so, Lord, I pray that we would receive from you whatever is from you. And God, I just pray as well that any of my words that are just my words that aren't from you would just fall away, that we would hear from you this morning. Amen. Okay, so any of you ever heard this letter before, or heard of it maybe? It's kind of famous. If you've never actually read it, you probably heard the term lukewarm church or a lukewarm person or something, yeah? I think that last week, which was an amazing service if you missed it, but we had some baptisms and there was some joking about the lukewarm water and the baptismal thing. But yeah, it's a challenging scripture for sure. And yeah, I'm excited though to dive into it this morning. It might surprise you a little bit after hearing that, but what I'm mostly going to focus on this morning is a topic that is so woven into our life. It's we can't escape it. It's there at every turn, but it's not necessarily something that we talk about very openly or that we examine very closely. And it's this word desire. Does that make you uncomfortable a little bit? Even the word itself is charged with all kinds of meaning, isn't it? It's disruptive. Desire is disruptive. It can be excruciatingly painful. It can be pleasurable. It can fill us with hope. It can fill us with despair. It is such a powerful thing. But one thing that it isn't is simple or comfortable or easy. That's for sure. We're going to talk about that a little bit this morning. But before I do, I want to tell you two stories. They're actually really one story, but from two perspectives. And they're my own story, but they're inspired by this letter here. So I want you to imagine with me, just humor me here. Use the imagination that God gave you. Actually first, before we do that, I want to give you a little bit of background. So to set the stage here before I tell my story. So this church here was in a place called Laodicea. It was in a valley, a prosperous valley in what we would now call Turkey in Asia Minor. It was located on the crossroads to a bunch of different trade routes, and so a lot of trade passed through this place. It was prosperous, it was fairly sophisticated for the area. There was a lot of people who had a lot of knowledge, had a lot of education. They were business people. They were famous for a couple of things. Number one, their garment industry. They made beautiful clothing that was, they had a very famous and unique kind of sheep that lived in the area that had this glossy, dark, black wool that they could make these beautiful black garments from that were shiny and just lovely, and people all over the world then loved these, and so they were famous for that. The other thing that they were famous for was an eye powder that was apparently helped people who were having difficulty be able to see better. Whether or not scientifically that would stand out today, I don't know. But at that time, many people around the world would buy this powder and put it on their eyes if they were nearsighted and hope that it would strengthen their vision. So those were the two things that this town was most famous for. It was also famous for being extremely proud. They were fiercely proud, self-reliant kind of community, so much so that in AD 60 there was a terrible earthquake that shook the whole area, and all of the cities and towns around there experienced major destruction. And so the emperor at that time very graciously said that he was going to give all of the cities in the area sort of like what we would call now federal aid to come and help rebuild those towns. All of them said, yes, please, we need your help, except for Laodicea said, you know what, actually, no thank you, we're good. We got this covered, probably at the expense of their most needy people, but they weren't going to take help from anybody. This is the kind of town that they were. Okay, so that gives you just a little bit of background. One other thing, though, they had one kind of thorn in their flesh, one thing that was an embarrassment to them and something that the citizens there complained about all the time. And it was this. Because they were sort of strategically located at the center of all these trade routes, they were far away from any clean, fresh source of water. There was a hot springs that wasn't too far away. So being the very sort of industrious people that they built this awesome aqueduct that would go from the hot springs to the town and would bring water to them. The problem was that the water was gross. It was full of minerals, and it was smelly, and it was not palatable at all. It was drinkable, it wouldn't kill you, but it tasted gross. And by the time it got to the town, it was lukewarm. So that's kind of the background of this letter that Jesus writes to this church. But now I want you to imagine for a minute. Okay, now we're going to go into our story time here. Imagine that the church at Laodicea, don't imagine like a group of people like we are here. I want you to imagine just one person, okay? Imagine this is one person. It can be a man or a woman. Doesn't matter, whatever suits your imagination better. But I want you to imagine this person is cosmopolitan, wealthy, a business person, sophisticated, well-educated. They've got kind of the world at their fingertips. They're incredibly independent, resourceful person. And they're sitting in the front room of their house. It's lavishly decorated, it's comfortable, there's fire crackling in the hearth, and they're reclining in front of what was an amazing feast. And now it's just sort of the leftover bits, some smeared cheese on a plate and a few grapes here and there, some crusts of bread. This room that is intended for entertaining right now, though, this person is sitting there alone. They're kind of reclining. Maybe they're smoking a pipe or reading a book. They're full. They're satisfied. Their eyes are half closed, and they're just drifting off to sleep after stuffing their faces. You guys got that picture in your head? Okay. In the middle of that peaceful, serene, satisfied scene, there is a knock on the door. The person's jolted out of their reverie, and and they look around the room kind of in alarm. They weren't expecting anyone. Who's there? Who's at the door? And a warm, beautiful voice comes through the door. It's me. It's Jesus, the one you've been waiting for. I'm here at last. Can you open the door? Can I come in? So the person is kind of caught off guard. Jesus says that they were expecting them, but actually they didn't think that they were. They were just enjoying the fruits of their labors. And they look around and they're tired and they're kind of sleepy and they're full. And so they call out to Jesus, and they like Jesus. They have no problem with Jesus, but they're like, Jesus, your timing is just not great. I no offense. I hope I don't offend you in any way, but truthfully, I just finished this amazing feast. I'm full, I'm stuffed. I was just drifting off to sleep. I think I'm gonna head up to bed, maybe another time. Okay, that's my story. This is the story of Laodicea. This is the story of a church that is self-satisfied, yeah? That thinks that they have everything that they need. It's a picture of a lukewarm church. This idea of a lukewarm church is one that I find very challenging, and I'll tell you why. Because that picture that I just told you, that story I just told you, could very well be about me. Often it is. If I'm honest with myself in my relationship with God, though I love Jesus, this is often the approach that I have with him. Is kind of a ambivalent, yeah, that'd be great, but I'm kind of busy, or I'm kind of full, or I'm kind of okay at the moment. And so when I read this passage, kind of hits a little close to home when I'm being honest. Because it's a bit harsh, isn't it? Did you catch the part about, like, I'm almost about to spit you out of my mouth? I don't want to hear that. I really don't want to hear that. That's the last thing I want to hear from the God that I know loves me. It scares me, if I'm truthful. So when I thought about doing this passage, I was a bit nervous because I knew it was going to be challenging to me personally. I knew it was going to probably be challenging to you guys. And I'm not a kind of person I don't like harsh things. I'm a pretty gracious person. I don't like rebukes. A passage like this leaves really only two alternatives. Either I can identify with this church and I can feel like a dagger in the heart and a little scared, or the other alternative is I can not identify with that and be like, that's not me. That's nothing like me. And kind of maybe look around the room and think, that may be like this guy. I could see how that might apply to them. And that kind of puts me in a place where I'm now being judgmental. I'm looking around and I don't like that either. So it's challenging. But what I really want to encourage you guys this morning is to not miss, first of all, the passion that Jesus has here, which makes sense, right? If he's talking to a lukewarm, kind of ambivalent church, it makes sense that he would use passionate, strong language because he's trying to get a point across. He's passionate about what he's saying, and it comes through, which can be a little bit jolting to us in our not so passionate state. But also there's love and there's tenderness. And as we explore this more this morning, I really hope that you don't miss that. And I have to say, as I've read this passage and studied it this week, I've come to love it and be so thankful that God chose to inspire it and to preserve it for us, to teach us today. So I'm going to tell you the second story, the second part of the story from a different perspective, okay? So imagine with me again. Imagine a man on a journey to see a long-time friend, a friend that he has loved for a long time and that he is so anxious to see. So he travels day and night for 3 days. He stops only to quickly wrap himself in a cloak and grab a few hours of sleep with a rock for his pillow and eat a quick bite of bread as he's traveling. He's urgently going to see his friend who he misses, whose company he's longing for. At last he arrives at the house, and it's evening, late in the evening, and he walks up the pathway and he knocks on the door. And the sound echoes around the valley, and he hears inside, "Oh, who's there? Who's it?" And he calls to the door, "It's me. It's Jesus, the one you've been waiting for. I'm here at last. Open the door. Let me come in." And there's silence for a minute, and then he hears the embarrassed, kind of uncomfortable reply, "Oh, shoot, Jesus, not the best timing. I'm full. I'm drifting off to sleep. Maybe another time." But Jesus, he's not so easily deceived. And he goes and he looks through the window, and what he sees brings tears to his eyes. The scene that I talked about earlier, this is not what he sees. He doesn't see sleek prosperity, satisfaction, a person who's eaten their fill and has everything they need. What he sees is a pitiful scene. He sees somebody curled up in the fetal position, naked, shivering, garbage strewn around them that he's clearly been eating. He's emaciated. He can see that he's in shock. His body's in shock at the point of near death. He can see his skin is so transparent that he can see his ribs as he's drawing ragged breaths. And Jesus is desperate to get through to his friend. "What madness is this?" he says. "You say you're full? You're not full. You're starving. You say you have everything you need? You don't. You don't. Please, I have a feast with me. Let me in. I want to come in. I want to feed you. I want to clothe you. I want to dress your wounds. Please, I'm begging you, open the door." That's the story from the perspective of Jesus. Two very different stories, aren't they? But can you see how they're connected? Can you see how Laodicea is that story from two different perspectives? And then, when we see it from that perspective, can you see how the voice of Jesus and what he has to say is drenched in love and care? I read some commentators of this passage who said that this is the one church, because this is the last, I think, of a list of 7 churches that Jesus dictates these letters to. And this is the only one, they say, and this is what they're kind of famous for, the only one of the group that there's nothing positive to be said about them. But I kind of disagree with that, because there's a lot here. The need that Jesus is talking about, though it might seem like it's a put down, it doesn't have to be. Here's the thing about need. When we need something, we need it. That's kind of just an objective fact. If I go half a day without eating and my stomach starts to growl, is this something I ought to be ashamed of? Should I be humiliated at the fact that I need that food? Or should I just accept the fact that that is what I need? That I'm a creature that needs food? If I can humbly just accept that, then I can address that, and I can act appropriately, and I don't need to suffer, right? But if I refuse to acknowledge that, if some weird sense of pride keeps me from admitting it, then I'm going to continue to be hungry. And this is the position of Laodicea. It need not be a put down that they are poor spiritually, that they're blind, that they're naked. It doesn't need to be a put down. For sure, they would have received it that way because of their pride. And I think that this is a lie that we even tell each other, and we tell it to ourselves, that when we need something, that's a bad thing. But I don't think it needs to be. I don't think that's the way it should be. So I'm going to admit to you that this is my story too, just as much as it's Laodicea's so often. But the other part of the story that I know and that I've experienced and that I can say to you with full confidence is that when I do open the door to Jesus, as I have many times in my life, he's good on his word. He comes in with a feast. He comes in with the clothes that I need, soft, luxurious garments where I'm warm and comfortable. He comes in with a salve to open my blind eyes to see things as they really are, to see myself as I really am, but without shame, knowing that I'm loved exactly as I am. This is what he does. So for this church, the issue really isn't whether or not they needed God, though that's what they said, right? They said, we don't have any need. We have everything we need. This is the word that they chose to use. But that wasn't the truth. The problem wasn't that they didn't need God. But what was the problem, do you think? It's that they didn't desire God, right? That was the real truth there. They were lacking in desire for God, though their need was apparent. They weren't desiring him. So here we are back to desire. And desire is a tricky thing, isn't it? Have you guys ever have you ever been in a position where you tried to will yourself into desire or will yourself out of desire? Do you know how hard that can be? If you don't want something, it's really hard to make yourself want it. And if you do want something, it's really hard to make yourself not want it. Have you guys experienced that? It's a tricky thing. It's really hard. Jesus, believe it or not, cared a lot about people's desires. One of his favorite things to ask people, one of his favorite questions was, what do you want? He asked that question a lot, actually. And he got a lot of different answers to that. Some good, some noble, some not so noble, some selfish. He got all kinds of answers. But always, that conversation with people was like a gateway. It was an entry point for him into relationship with them. He cared about what they desired, even when their desires were twisted. He cared about it. I'm not saying that he was like some genie in a bottle who was just going around granting wishes. Not at all. But what people desired matters to him. And I think it's true today, too. Our desires are a place where God wants to meet us. We know, I think, intrinsically that this relationship between need and desire is also very complicated, isn't it? Often the thing that I need, I don't desire. You guys ever experienced that? And the thing that I desire is sometimes the opposite of what I need. And we kind of know that. But at the same time, it's not like they're completely separate, need and desire. They're related too. And food is a great example of this. We all need food. But sometimes, and we desire food most of the time. But a lot of times the exact kind of food that we desire isn't necessarily the food that we need, and vice versa, correct? Yeah, right? I might need protein and calcium and good, healthy, wholesome food, but what I desire is, I don't know, like chips and wine, right? So we know this. This is just something that's apparent in our whole life, and we know this. But that doesn't mean that need and desire aren't connected. It's just they have a very interesting relationship. I like to think about it like, and this wasn't my own idea, I can't remember where it came from, but this idea of two staircases. One that starts here, one that starts here, and they're both spiraling like this, down, 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 down. But they never quite meet. But sometimes, and one's desire, one's need. Sometimes what I desire is here and what I need is here, and then later they're like this, and later like this, and they kind of shift, but they're never quite meeting. They're always just sort of parallel. But somewhere deep, deep down, so far down sometimes that we can't even see it, there's a place where need and desire meat at the bottom. But often it's so complicated, we don't even know. We have no idea what that is or where that is. How many of you, if Jesus was here right now and said, "What do you want?" would have an easy answer to that question? It's complicated, right? It's a tough question to answer. What do I want? I don't know. Half the time I have no idea. And what I think I want, maybe it's not even what I really want. What I think I need, maybe it's not really what I need. These are difficult questions to answer. So it's a complicated thing. I love the contrast. You guys know the story of the woman, the Samaritan woman at the well? The story where Jesus met with this woman. I'm not going to go into it. That would be a whole other sermon. It's a story that's been powerful in my own life. But Jesus meets this woman, and at the beginning, he asks the woman for a drink of cool, refreshing water from that well. But somewhere along the lines in the conversation, he says to this woman, "If you knew who I was, you would ask me for a drink of the living water that would quench your thirst, where you would never thirst." And I love contrasting in my mind this letter, this story with that. Because in that story with the woman at the well, Jesus is saying, "I am your drink of cool, refreshing water. That's who I am. When you ask me to be that for you, it's like cool, refreshing drink for me." Compare that with Laodicea, who refused to ask Jesus for anything. And they weren't a cool, refreshing drink to him. Instead, they were a mouthful of tepid, smelly, mineral water that he could barely drink down. And there's a connection there. I think that we often think about our relationship with God in completely upside down terms. And some of what I might say here, you might find shocking. Maybe you're going to question it, and that's good. I want you to do that. But we sometimes think about what we have to offer God. We think about how we can serve him. We think about how we love him. And in a weird way, although that might seem selfless and kind of giving, it can actually become a little bit self-focused in that way. God, the God of the Bible, is actually presented as a God who has no needs. Did you know that? He doesn't make us because he needs us. He made us because he desires us. Did you know that? He desires us. He desires our company. He desires to knock on our door and come in and eat with us, to have a feast with us. Far more than he ever would need us to do anything for him. In fact, he doesn't. John Piper, famous for his book Desiring God, puts it this way: what is the greatness of God? Or how is our God different from all other gods? The prophets of Scripture deride all the other so-called gods that try to exalt themselves by making man work for them. God is unique, and his uniqueness is that he aims to be the workman for us, not vice versa. Our job, then, is simply to wait for God. So did you catch that? Which is exactly the thing that the Laodiceans weren't doing. They weren't turning to God, they weren't relying on him for anything, and they weren't waiting for him. They were choosing instead to meet their own needs. So it's this idea of being self-satisfied, which I think that I know I can relate to. I think that is something that's big in our culture, so much so that you might honestly be asking yourself the question right now, and I know that many would, what's wrong? What's wrong with being self-satisfied? Isn't that kind of the goal? To not have to rely on anyone or anything, to be able to meet all my needs in and of myself, to be independent, to be self-reliant. Isn't that kind of a noble and good thing? Then I don't need to take anything from anybody. Then I don't need to ask anything from anybody. I'm good on my own. Like Laodicea after the earthquake. No, we're good. Keep your money, save it for someone better. I'm good. Is that a good thing? I don't know. It could be. Except that what if this? What if it's just a mirage? What if there's no truth to it? What if I'm deceiving myself? And like that picture of the person in that room trying to fill themselves with garbage, starving to death, if that's actual reality, then it doesn't suffice. If I can't really fill my own desires and needs by myself, if that's just not attainable, then how can that be the goal? It's just not going to work. And that is kind of the picture of the human condition that the Bible presents. That as people, we do need God, whether or not we desire Him. But I'm going to present you with another little quick, how much time we got here? Theory. And this is my theory, so take it or leave it. But that we all do desire God. That we all do desire God. It's just that this staircase is so long and complicated of need and desire. We've covered over our desire for God with so many other things that we can't find it sometimes. And I think we do it for this reason, because desire is uncomfortable, like I said before. So if I desire something that's easily attainable by myself, if I can make myself desire that thing, then my life is so much more simple, because I can acquire that thing by my own means. But what if the one that I desire is the one person in this world that I can't manipulate or cajole or control or demand of? What then? Is that a little bit terrifying? I think so. And I think that's kind of the crux of the problem. So it's so much easier for us to substitute that desire, that hunger for God, with other things that are much easier for us to obtain. Because we might like a little bit of desire, but we don't want to live and sit with it for too long. And this is why I think money is such a big thing for us. Not just because it helps us to get the things we need, but it puts us in a position where we can quite easily obtain all the things we want. So we're not in a position of desire for overly long. Do you think that kind of makes sense? Simplifying it a little bit. But I think that's a lot of its allure. So, if you, like me, find yourself where, if you're totally honest, it can sometimes be hard to find that desire for God, here's my challenge to you. You can't make yourself want Him, but I think you can let Jesus into that place of desire and let Him ask you those questions. What is it that you want? And you can reply honestly. And what you want might not be super noble. You might know that that thing that first springs to mind isn't maybe what you need, but tell Him. Tell Him that that's what you want. And let Him in to have a little bit of a meal with you and have a conversation about that. Let Him probe that a little bit. Let Him ask some questions. Why? Why is that the thing you want? What might be underneath that? Let's go down that staircase a level or two. Does that make sense? So for example, maybe the first thing that comes to mind might be something like, what I want. I want a weekend away from my family, my kids, my husband. I just want some peace and quiet for one weekend. Okay. And maybe that's it. But maybe if I let Jesus kind of ask me, well, why? Why is that the thing that you want right now? Never really thought about it too much. Well, maybe I feel like everybody just wants something from me and is demanding of my time, and I don't have enough to go around. Okay, well, let's talk about that. Why is that happening? Where does that come from? You see what I mean? There's a good conversation there. Best person to have that with would be Jesus. Because he cares about our desires. He cares about what we need. And he wants to get to that place, ultimately, where he can show us that he wants to fulfill the deep desires of our heart. Did you know that? Some philosophies talk quite negatively about desire, like it's something just to overcome, to transcend. But Jesus, that's not his message. He presents himself not as a means to transcending desire, but as the fulfillment of our desires. He's come that we might have life and have it to the full. That's what he says. One of his names is the desire of nations. Did you know that? Desire matters to him. It's important to him. Although, admittedly, it can be very messy. We know when we give ourselves over to desires, they can take us over. They can even make us slaves to them. We know that. He wants to set us free in those places. But not by crushing desire, not by taking it away, by untwisting it a little bit, till we get to the place where we realize that what we need and what we desire is really wrapped up in who he is. And in case you think that I am saying here that everything in this world is meaningless or evil and only God matters, that's not what I'm saying. God made this world. He enjoys it. He wants us to enjoy it too. The message of Christianity has never been that this world, the material world, is evil. But it's this, that it loses its meaning, it loses its beauty, and it becomes twisted and something else entirely apart from him. It only finds its true purpose, its beauty in him. And without that connection to him, we'll miss it. It won't be what it was intended to be. I wanted to read this quote from one of my favorite theologians, C.S. Lewis. Where did it go here? He wrote very brilliantly on this topic of desire. A lot of different things. It comes through in almost all his works. But this is what he wrote about this idea of enjoying and being satisfied in God. We can't hear the song of a bird simply as a sound. Its meaning or message, that it is a bird, comes with it inevitably. In the same way, it is possible to read as well as to have a pleasure, or not even as well. The distinction ought to become, and sometimes is, impossible. To receive it and to recognize its divine source are a single experience. This sweet air whispers of the country from whence it blows. It is a message. We know we are being touched by a finger of that right hand at which there are pleasures forevermore. There need be no question of thanks or praise as a separate event, something done afterwards. To experience the tiny theophany is itself to adore. So when we walk through a cherry orchard in full blossom, or we dive into cool swimming hole surrounded by fragrant evergreens, or we bite into fresh baked bread slathered in butter, we can experience God, not because God is those things, but because he made those things and because he wants us to enjoy them in him. So, where are you this morning? What is it that you want? How does God want to touch you in that place? time is it? I'm going to ask Chris to come up. I know we're almost out of time. But I'm going to ask you guys, if you don't mind, just to stay with me for a few minutes here. I want to lead us in a time of prayer around this topic. First, have a conversation with God. Chris is going to play, but I want you to enter into that conversation with Jesus. Let him ask you, what is it that you want? Let him show you your place of need. If you're spiritually starving, let him show you that. Don't go to a place of shame. Go to a place of asking him now to come and fill your need. And ask him to go with you a little bit down that staircase of desire and need. What is it that you want? What is it that you really want? What is it you want even more? And how does Jesus want to talk to you in that place? Can we do that? So if you can, maybe, well, Chris plays. You can sing if you want, but I want you to have that conversation with Jesus. And then I'm going to come up and I'll close us in prayer in just a minute, okay?
To see my King in majesty, your grace compels my soul to love and draw in close. Submit to any fear. Where I go, to a new place, more of you. Lead me to you. Forever I will pursue. I will pursue. You are my heart. Jesus, you're all that I want. All that I want. All I need is you. All I need is you, Lord. Is you, Lord. All I need is you. All I need is you, Lord. Is you, Lord. Sing it. All I need is you. All I need is you, Lord. Is you, Lord. All I need is you. All I need is you, Lord. Is you, Lord. I close my eyes and see my King in majesty. Your grace compels my soul to love and draw in close.
Jesus, we need you. Uptown Church needs you. I need you. My family needs you. Oh, God. Our marriages need you. God, I just pray that we would never be self-satisfied. We would never forget how we need you. That we would depend on you. That we would run to you. We would find our desires met in you, Lord. I just pray, Lord, this morning that we would meet you in that place of desire. That we would find you there. Did you guys have an answer to that question? That Jesus would ask you what you want? So I'm going to encourage you this week as a way of sort of keeping this with you. There's a kind of prayer, and if you've never heard of it, Roger's talked about this before. It's a way of praying. There's so many ways you can pray, but Roger has talked before about, do you guys remember the Abba, I belong to you? Do you remember that? As you breathe in, you say Abba, and as you breathe out in your mind, you say, I belong to you. It's called breath prayer. So that's one way you could do it, but I'm going to challenge you this week to think of a name of God that's dear to you, that means a lot to you. And then that cry of your heart in that conversation with Jesus, that desire that you had, that place, that desire of your heart, that ache, As you breathe out, give that to Jesus. Say that to him. So maybe it will be something like, healer, healing God, heal my broken heart. Maybe it'll be something like, shepherd, bring home my lost daughter. Maybe it will be, loving God, restore my marriage. Whatever it is, whatever that cry of your heart is, maybe it was just, God, I need you. Whatever it is, I'm going to encourage you this week, in moments where you think of it, as you breathe in and you breathe out, give that prayer to him. Can we do that? Okay, we're going to finish with some more worship, and then love you guys. Bless you.